Welcome, my dear students of class 10A and 10B to my history series class. There is a good news for you. 4 students of our school have scored 100 out of 100. Have scored 100 out of 100 in my subject history and civics. I do believe you will be encouraged by them and perform better in your exam, in the upcoming ICSE exam. Thank you, my dear students. Now I am going to discuss about the partition plan, the Lord Mountbatten plan. In my previous class, I discussed about Lord Mountbatten plan from different angles. Why was that plan accepted? What was the importance of Lord Mountbatten plan? And how many clauses were there in the Lord Mountbatten plan, and who were the leaders ultimately favored the plan. And another point that was very important also, that was Lord Mountbatten plan proposed the partition of India before the big 7 leaders. Who were the big 7 leaders? Nehru, Patel, Kripalani, Jinnah, Liaquat, Nistar and Baldev Singh. These are the big 7 leaders of India. Before the big 7 leaders, Lord Mountbatten put his plan for the partition of India. And ultimately, the Muslim League and the Congress accepted the partition plan. As a result of it, Lord Mountbatten left certain clauses in his plan. What were the clauses? I also discussed partition number 1. Second, relations between the two dominions, India and Pakistan, a boundary commission, the princely states, Bengal and Punjab, Sikh, Northwest Frontier Province, and the district of Sylhet, Constituent Assembly and transfer of power. Finally, they came to a conclusion that transfer of power, which was the main demand of the Congress, should be immediately realized. Now how? Only for that reason, some Congress leaders and leaders of Muslim League, they discussed with each other regarding the procedure and process of shifting of power, and the plan ended with the declaration that the transfer of power would take place not in June 1948 but much earlier than that. The British Parliament would pass an act for the transfer of power before August 15, 1947. It was decided. Now the acceptance of the partition plan, acceptance of the Mountbatten plan, the historic plan which was proposed by Lord Mountbatten, finally it was accepted. The nationalists deplored although the nationalists deplored the partition plan, deplored the partition of India, while the Muslim leagues also were not fully satisfied with the way Pakistan was divided, but they accepted it because the plan for partition. They accepted the plan for only partition. All India Congress Committee accepted the Mountbatten plan because there were 2 distinguished leaders from Congress, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. What role had they played? Maulana Abul Kalam Azad quoted that there was no alternative for the Congress except partition. So it should be better for them to accept Lord Mountbatten plan of partitioning India, according to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad tried to make it understand with persuasive arguments, and ultimately the Congress leaders accepted the arguments of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel quoted refusal of the demand for Pakistan will amount to dividing the country into so many Pakistans, according to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. So the inner meaning, what he meant to say, the Congress leaders as well as the Muslim leaders realized, and ultimately the proposal accepted Mountbatten plan. And another one, role of Pandit Nehru. Pandit Nehru, in order to make them understand, those who were not in favor of accepting the partition plan or Mountbatten plan, Pandit Nehru tried to make them understand by way of quoting one line, that was, a smaller India with a strong central authority would be better than a bigger state with a weak center. A smaller India with a strong authority, with a strong central authority would be better than a bigger state with a small or with a weak center or weak authority. The others who were present there, they realized, they understood what Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru meant to say. They realized, they understood it. So this is the role of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and the role of All India Congress Committee. The All India Congress Committee from the very beginning favored the partition plan of Lord Mountbatten. Lord Mountbatten from the very beginning favored the partition plan. Why? He realized that India was a country of different communities, especially two major communities, the Hindus and the Muslims, who got themselves involved in many riots. In order to avoid riots, in order to avoid contradictions between the two communities, he proposed before the big seven leaders to accept the partition plan. Suddenly, Mahatma Gandhi stood and quoted one line. In my previous class I discussed that one. I repeat that the division of India can only do harm to the country's future. I repeat that the division of India can only do harm to the country's future. Quote and unquote, full stop. In order to discourage the other Congress leaders, he quoted that line. But immediately Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru stood and requested the other Congress leaders to hear him. Then he added that line, that a smaller India with a strong central authority was better than a bigger state with a weak center. My dear countrymen, my dear Congress leaders and other leaders of different parties, ultimately the partition plan, the Mountbatten plan was accepted, and Mahatma Gandhi remained silent. The leaders felt that further delay in the transfer of power would find India in the midst of a civil war. That's why they did not want to make it delay the process of shifting of power to the Indians. They did not want to make delay. The leaders felt the partition would lead the constitution to separate electorates and other undemocratic procedures. India could then evolve a truly secular and democratic polity. The leaders felt it. That's why, my dear students, the reason behind it, why did the partition plan finally the Congress leader decide to accept? Because of the reason, they realized that avoiding partition, communal riots between the two communities, the Hindus and Muslims, was very important. The British wanted to shift power to the Indians, but if they failed to avail themselves of the opportunity, the process of shifting power might become delayed. That's why it should be their first and foremost duty to accept the proposal of Lord Mountbatten and India, so that India must be partitioned into two dominions, India and Pakistan. The two independent countries, the two countries would become independent and relations between the two communities would become healthy. That's why Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru proposed to accept the partition plan of Lord Mountbatten. Ultimately, in order to avoid large-scale riots, communal riots that engulf the country, the whole country, convinced all that the only solution to the communal problem lay in the partition of India. That's why ultimately the proposal of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was finally accepted and partition plan was accepted. Now, what was about the reaction among the people of India? The people of India who had been watching regular newspapers on the eve of the procedure of shifting power to the Indians, what was going to be happen? They had been eagerly waiting to witness the historical incident that India was going to be an independent country, and at the same time another country would be formed, that was Pakistan, for the Muslim people. The people favored the partition because of their trade, commerce, because of their society. They wanted to lead a very peaceful life during the time of communal riots, large-scale communal riots which took place in main cities of India, Kolkata, Bombay, Madras, Kolkata, Bombay, Madras, Ahmedabad, Lucknow, the main cities had become the center of riots. That's why the people of India wholeheartedly supported the partition plan of Lord Mountbatten, and finally the partition plan of Lord Mountbatten was accepted by the Congress. As a result of it, the British Parliament decided to pass an act, and that act is known as Indian Independence Act of 1947. The Indian Independence Act was passed in the year 1947 in order to shift power to the Indians. And some clauses also were mentioned in the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Today I shall not teach that point. Next day onwards, I shall continue teaching of the Indian Independence Act of 1947. What was Indian Independence Act? Why was it passed? What were the clauses mentioned in the Indian Independence Act of 1947? Next day, I shall discuss it, my dear student. And today's discussion, already I think you have already understood all the points. The quotation of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the quotation of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the quotation of Mahatma Gandhi, the quotation of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, which encouraged the Congress leaders and other members of different parties of India to accept the Lord Mountbatten's partition plan. And finally, the partition plan was accepted, and as a result of it, the British Parliament decided to pass an act known as the Indian Independence Act 1947. The Indian Independence Act 1947. The Congress and other political parties, the Congress, the Muslim Leagues, they all came to a conclusion that only partition would be the proper solution of removing distress, removing contrast between the two communities, the Hindus and the Muslims. Finally, the partition plan accepted Lord Mountbatten's partition plan. Up to this, my dear student, British Parliament role I discussed, it passed the Indian Independence Acts in the year 1947. Next day, I shall teach you Indian Independence Acts in detail form. Thank you.